Welcome to the Hardwonwisdom podcast with best-selling author Fawn Germer and corporate innovator Michelle Brigman. Come here weekly for career and life-changing conversations with some of today's most influential thought leaders, senior executives, and trailblazers who will share their mentoring wisdom. This podcast is brought to you by the Women's Leadership Network.
Hi, I'm Fawn Germer.
And I'm Michelle Brigman.
And today our guest is Yassi Hadjibashi, who has a great story of resilience and adapting and a road through her career that led her to being the CEO and co-founder of a really interesting company called Stretch. Yassi, welcome to Hardwonwisdom podcast.
Thank you so much for the warm welcome and for having me.
It's our pleasure. So you have such a story that will be very interesting to people about what happened in your childhood that brought you to this point. So let's dive right in, the defining moments along the way.
Yeah, so I would say exciting immigrant story here in the United States, trying to make my American dream come true. So I came here to study back in 2001. So a long time ago, which hopefully doesn't give away my age. But came here to study at college and essentially trying to build my life. I had visited the United States many times before, at least 4 times to my memory, because of family members who live here and my parents, wanting us to always travel and see the world. So I always had a very special place in my heart for wanting to come and actually live here. So finally, after finishing high school in Germany, I decided to come here and went initially to community college for 2 years, which I highly recommend to anybody inside America or coming from the outside and wanting to start, getting into the college system and build their life. You save a lot of money. And it really, I think, shaped my vision of what I wanted to pursue in the US. Those 2 years, I met a number of amazing individuals. In Germany, I never had any Iranian friends. And then I arrived in California and the majority of my friends were Iranians. So I was just so mesmerized by the Persian community that lives here. And I think kind of the bigger vision that this is a country where different communities can essentially come together, support each other, and all be successful together. So most of my friends that I formed, and met during those early days are all doing amazing things in their lives now. But for me, I went on and transferred to UC Berkeley and got my college degree after 4 years in business administration. And that was a lot of hard work. It was not easy to transfer out and get into UC Berkeley. It was a very competitive school. But education for me just kind of was very, very priority in my life here as I wanted to really make my American dream come true.
Because first of all, we've got you coming here from Germany, and then you mentioned meeting Iranian people. But tell me a little about your background, your parents, how you grew up, and so why that is an issue.
Yeah, so both parents are Iranian. And I myself was born in Iran. I have an older brother who's 8 years older than me. It's the 2 of us. And back in 1990, I was in 2nd grade. My father came home one day and said, I have this opportunity to my job for us to either move to Germany or to Dubai. And I decided we're going to, as a family, move to Germany. And this was very exciting to us because this was at the end of the 8-year war with Iran and Iraq, which the last phase of that war, Tehran, where I used to live with my family, was, experiencing airstrikes from the Iraqi army. And I didn't have a proper 1st grade schooling. After 3 months in the 1st grade, my school shut down and my mother became my teacher. So for months, I was just, learning from her and from some classes on TV, and just went to take exams at the end of the school year, but really felt insecure in terms of my foundational, I would say, Farsi language, which is the Persian language, and math skills. And kind of that stuck with me for many years to come. And so all of us, including my brother, were kind of very, very excited to leave Iran because we just had this not, exciting and happy experience of experiencing war at such a young age. And Germany sounded very exotic to us. My mom was even shocked. She was like, why not Dubai? At least there we can speak some English, and the kids have learned some English in school. None of us speaks German. And I think the expectation was we're going to migrate to Germany. My dad has his job and maybe spend a few years there, and we're going to come back. So it's a nice sort of experience for the kids, for us as a family. And then fast forward from 1990, my parents still live in Germany 32 years later, which
Wow.
I don't think they ever thought it would last forever, and really changed my life when I, at that young age, came into this completely different culture. I didn't have to wear the headscarf anymore to go to school and cover my hair. And my first friend in school was this girl from Ethiopia. I had never met anybody from Africa before, and she became my first and best friend. And my second best friend was a girl from Venezuela. So really started meeting a few others who were in similar shoes like me in this class in a German school that kind of taught us German, but at the same time, elementary school skills to really adapt us to the culture so that after a year, we could go into normal, just German class, just like all the other kids. So that cultural adaptation was a big thing in my life at that point.
So yeah, and Michelle, don't you think like that the lesson out of that really is how did you learn so young to fit in, make yourself adapt when really, you'd come out of such a traumatic place in the first place and then having to do that. So tell us a little of your coping strategies that might be helpful to others.
I would say maybe a little bit sort of my approach and behavior. I have always been a very smiley, welcoming person, and it has served me really, really well. And I think that's the different nature of different humans, right? Some of us, we come into a new room and we put a smile on and we try to be welcoming. Others are not, they come into a room and they come with a very serious posture. So I would say even at that young age, my kind of warm and smile and welcoming posture really served me well by opening myself up to making new friends, and as frightening as it is to be, taking the first step to talk to somebody, that's essentially what I started doing. I started like just talking with my very limited vocabulary of German, probably just 5-6 words, saying hello, how are you, to these other, young kids who were my age. And what I will, however, say, I had a wonderful, wonderful teacher. She was absolutely amazing, so warm. And there was always the stereotype that German culture is not very warm, that you come in and unless you speak their language fluently, you're going to really be isolated out. And this teacher, who was my first real exposure to German culture, really completely shaped my view that, wow, I love this country. She's so nice. She's looking after me. She's really helping me out to learn German fast. So, and I really ended up learning the language really fast. And it's actually pretty hard language for people who may pick it as a foreign language. But because of learning it so fast, I kind of became sort of like a doer of many things for my family, being like going to the immigration office with my parents and being a translator, or going to the bank, or trying to translate legal documents. And my own vocabulary was very limited, but I would just kind of do the job of going into dictionaries and try to translate from German to Farsi. So kind of taking on a lot of tasks at the age of 8.5 years old that typically will probably not happen to you in life until you're like 16, 18, maybe even 20 years old.
I think about just listening to your story too, your whole sense of safety and stability was completely gone.
Yeah.
Right. I mean,
Right.
So it's a scary place, and it's a scary place. And that's one of those core memories as a child. And then here you show up in Germany, and it sounds like that teacher was so instrumental in terms of you felt safe and you were learning, and you were probably receiving a lot of, positive affirmations in terms of, it felt good. And then to think about the fact that you could serve in a role with your family of the helper and guide and teacher, I just think about that probably had to really help address some of the wounds of safety and security and value, to be such just so much of service to your family. And then having, worked with you, going back to the comment you made about just the smile, because yes, you walk in a room and you light it up. And so it doesn't matter what language you speak, that is a very powerful nonverbal tool in the toolkit.
And to your point on, I think on safety, spot on. I think there is a differentiation between sort of the physical safety where, unlike Iran, I felt physically very safe in Germany. And, after my first probably 10 months of going to school, my mom would allow me to just take the public transportation, go to school by myself and come back. And that was very common in Germany. Kids already at the age of 7, 8 ride their own bikes and go to school and come back and don't have their parents, drop them off and pick them up again. So I think it kind of already made me feel like, oh, I can just go to places myself. I felt more adult. But then finally, when it comes to safety, sort of the cultural safety, that's the piece where I didn't feel safe. And I had to really kind of break into a new environment and learn many lessons myself, because neither of us in the family was there to teach me those lessons. And funny, I will never forget, that first year, we also had another Persian kid in that same class. He was a boy. And he was always very picking on me, bullying me, just being nasty on me. And it was so shocking to me because I came in this environment. I thought, oh, we Persians, you're also from Iran. I'm from Iran. So we're gonna stick together. And he was just so nasty to me. And then my best friends came to be from countries I had never even heard of before. And we were getting along so well, the three of us, the girl from Ethiopia, from Venezuela, and me from Iran. So, and to your point, I started building that sort of cultural safety and defining it very differently myself.
So if you want to translate that into what somebody might feel when they have a job, let's say they're going to a job and they feel like they don't fit in. And when you feel like you don't fit in, even though everybody is speaking English, it feels like they're all speaking a different language because sometimes there's a bad fit. So what did you learn through that might be helpful to get others to feel comfortable, other than smile? But it's like, how do you feel secure within yourself?
I think even if you have doubts, it's very important to take the first step and approach people and find that sort of very delicate, non-invasive way of starting a conversation with someone and kind of checking the climate. Is this someone who is open to, meet and greet and have a conversation? Or is this someone who's maybe stuck up, doesn't want to, and kind of have that emotional intelligence to read and act accordingly. If you try to have a conversation with someone and you see there is not much enthusiasm there, let go, don't force yourself upon them. And to your point, it can be very scary if you're insecure, if you're shy, if an introvert, to want to take the first step and open your mouth and say the hello, my name is Yassi, how are you? And potentially not getting any response back and somebody just stares at you. And that happens sometimes in Germany too. Somebody would just stare at you like, what's wrong with you? Why are you saying hello? So it happens. Like on the street, sometimes you walk and you want to be nice, you smile at somebody and they just stare at you of like, what's wrong with you? Why are you smiling? So it's very different cultural differences there. But I think it really helps you to form relationships that you never expected you would. And when you're new in any environment, you will eventually find that first and second person who become your friends. So even if you get exposure to some negative and unapproachable people, don't give up. Keep doing this with different individuals. Just have the emotional intelligence to back off when you're not welcomed. And eventually we'll find that first or two people that will welcome you, and you start feeling more at home in that new environment and building yourself a network.
I really liked how you were sharing your experience with the community college because, Michelle, sometimes we're out there and people are all bragging about where they went to school. And I had to do a keynote at Harvard. And I looked out at those people and I said, I just want to tell you, I am a proud graduate of Manatee Community College, right? Because honestly, that decision to spend, well, for me, it was a year, just, getting familiar with something that was going to be a very difficult adjustment was really helpful to me. And I just wonder, are there ways that we can do this throughout our lives when we know something's going to be different so we can take a baby step?
I agree. I think it all comes down to your own personality. If you are ambitious and focused and you're dedicated to working hard, it doesn't matter where you start. You will find a way to keep growing and get yourself the next step. It doesn't matter if you start right away in a fancy, private school, or you start in a community college, but you're focused, hardworking, you get your straight A's, you get a great GPA, and then you transfer yourself out to another great school, so.
Well, I mean, like I didn't finish college. I was probably the last person that anybody would think, growing up, because excelled in school, loved school, but life took me down a different path. And I remember going to work specifically at Dell. And here I am surrounded by the MIT MBA student, the Harvard, all of these incredibly intelligent people. Talk about imposter syndrome, which is what I think we're dancing around here, like, oh, please, please, please don't ask me where I went, for fear of having to, feeling less than. And so I really appreciate the point you're making, Yassi, about we all start in different places. It's how do we learn and grow and continue to evolve and work hard. It's about kind of where you end up, not necessarily where you start.
And I don't think it's really a discussion about where you went to school, because, I got my bachelor's at USF in Tampa, my master's at Florida, and nobody has ever been curious either A, what grades I got, or B, where I went, except when I'm up in Boston. And everybody there wants to talk about where you went to school, even if it was 40 years ago. But I wonder if that's something that we carry with us, because when I hear people asking that, I think, what snobs, right? I mean, who cares where I went to school? And we have to be secure in our own backgrounds, whether we're talking about school or if we were raised poor or whatever we had that seems less than what would be super successful and, the so-called ideal. I think we have to put that and bury that, because those are things that reflect about the people who care about them.
Yeah.
And if you don't personally care about them, you can just charge ahead like Michelle did. I think the fact that you have gotten so far and done so well, think about it, and don't have a college degree says a heck of a lot more about your brain power and determination than if you could say, oh, yes, I went to Harvard. What would that say? So.
Absolutely. It's very, very true. And I think, unfortunately, it's just how in society we have been nurturing these values of, where did you go to school? So when you're applying for certain field of jobs, and in those days, I think a lot of graduates come out, they want to go either into investment banking. If you go back into the 90s or early 2000s, or even mid 2000s, it's either investment banking or consulting, some corporate development job. And I think the sort of criteria was like, not only just where did you go to school, what's your GPA on top of it?
Yeah, right.
So, and what major did you have? It's almost these filters that get put on candidates. And unfortunately, I think at that age, you're just not so mature enough yet to kind of let go of those societal pressures and say, what do I want to really do? Where do I really want to be? What type of people do I really want to work with? And I'm going to focus on that. I would like to believe that the Gen Zers are a lot more aware and mature than my generation, sort of, the old millennials. From what I'm hearing, I think there is definitely a new sort of transformation in terms of how Gen Zers are thinking about themselves, their life, and their journey. So hopefully, to your point, these sort of traditional filters and values of who makes a great candidate to start their career after college, or even, without college, all these are just going to be let go. And I see a lot of that now, I think, to be quite honest, through my job, of how, because of the labor shortage, a lot of these artificial filters are being dropped because companies just can't get away otherwise, to hire individuals, because there's otherwise just all these endless vacancies in firms.
One of the things I think is so fascinating about you is you broke into a heavy boys club.
Yeah, boy.
For one of the biggest, global banks, but your story in terms of how you got there, because you took a very different, you took a left turn in your career path, right? And I think that that's something, a little bit of that story is really going to resonate with our folks in terms of that career pivot.
And the only thing I say is, even though I would say in banking, and specifically in banking, going into product, going into data, like you kind of like build these filters of less woman, less woman, less woman, it's just like reducing the female representation and all these fields. One thing that I always was very, 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 passionately keen on is I don't want to change my personality. I don't want to change who I am just in order to advance to the next level and be successful. So if it means that in some environment, somebody doesn't like me, and by the way, I'm not saying it in terms of, I'm not open to feedback, whatever, but it's like, for example, I need to always say what the boss wants to hear in order to fit in. I should always just be the yes woman. Yes, whatever you say is true. And a lot of times you see that in these corporate cultures around circles of individuals who kind of climb up together, and they bring their cronies and they all climb together, that you have sort of the boss, and then there is the entourage of yes people, whatever you say, and they all climb together. The boss goes up, the other people go together with him or with her, so, and I always refused to be that. I always wanted to be the independent thinker, saying and doing what's right, calling out what I don't think doesn't seem right to me, and happy to be convinced with facts and data and alternative views, so, and sometimes it served me well, and sometimes it did not serve me well. Sometimes it slowed me down. It created enemies because, like you, for example, disagreed with me in a meeting, and that means you're an enemy. How could you do that? And I think sometimes with my bosses, that did not resonate very well. But you gotta just believe in, if you're doing what you're doing is right, don't change who you are. And I never felt comfortable to just say, yes, sir, you're right. Even though in my heart, I feel like what my boss is saying doesn't make sense. Like I just fundamentally don't agree with it. And I don't think he or she has the facts and the data to convince me otherwise. Otherwise, I'm happy to always be, changing my view and going different. So it's very important, I think, for individuals to make sure, what is your ethical compass, what feels right, what feels wrong to you, and make sure you don't change just because you want to take that quick step and getting the promotion and moving on, because eventually it's going to come back to you and you may not feel comfortable in your own skin of who you are.
Wow. Do you have any good stories about that?
I think, I'm not going to say which firm, but, because big corporations, I think, all have replicas of these stories. But I was working for a boss, and there was an individual in my team was doing great work. But it seems from previous work life, there was some history there between the boss and this individual in my team. So the boss was not very supportive of myself giving the promotion to this individual, which I had hired through a very fair process. I had never worked with an individual before, came just through an applicant through the process. And we had like a tremendous, interviewing procedure to make sure we picked the best candidate. And I really felt this individual has worked hard and deserves that promotion. So with HR, I fought for it. I was like, I don't see any reason of why we're not giving this promotion to this individual, just because there seems to be a negative sentiment. Where are the facts? The person's reviews are great in the company. The colleagues of this individual love this person. I'm going to give this promotion. At the end of the day, my boss was like, well, it's up to you. Which, when you get that sentence, that means,
setting you up to fail.
But you know what I think? And I made the decision. I gave the promotion. And I think it created a lot of negative sentiment where my boss from that point onwards didn't have my back anymore. But you know what? It's something I never regret to the day, because I truly fundamentally believe this individual did amazing work. That promotion was well-deserved. And unfortunately, it did not do well for me and my career, but I feel good about doing the right thing for the individual who had deserved, the promotion. So
that goes back to being able to look yourself in the mirror. I know you had a mentor that completely changed your trajectory and helped you move into data. That's a fascinating story, because there's a lot of women who get a shoulder tap with somebody saying, I think you need to pursue this. And it feels foreign. But you said yes.
I said yes. Yeah. That goes, this person I named Usama Fayyad, Dr. Fayyad. That was back in Barclays, where I was working in customer experience and product. And he was the first ever chief data officer that joined Barclays to build out a data function for the whole bank. And his background, he's a true data scientist. You know, he worked for NASA, he had data companies, he sold one of his data companies to Yahoo and was back in 2003 the first chief data officer at Yahoo, and Yahoo was a hot company, you know. So he approached me to a recommendation from somebody else at Barclays at that time and said, I'm looking for a chief of staff. Why don't you come and work for me? And for those who may come from financial services backgrounds, especially big banks, the chief of staff role can be very tricky. Sometimes it can be the coolest role where you're truly a deputy, thinking about strategy, how all the pieces come together. And sometimes it could almost be more of a traditional administrative role, kind of like, you know, dealing with extended HR practices, just making sure the team is taken care of. I was at that time in my career very interested in more strategic stuff, you know, and less so into the sort of administrative tasks of leading a team. So, and I made it very clear to me. I said to him, look, thank you so much for thinking. But first of all, I have no idea of what data is. This goes back to 2013, end of 2013. And so I have no background in data. I've done just 2 computer science classes when I was in college, but no data courses. And he was said, no, but you're an amazing leader in customer experience. I think you can bring a very different perspective to the data function I want to build, because all these are going to be like engineers and scientists. And then there you are with the business and product and customer lens coming into a data function. I think it will be a good mix. And it was frightening because he's a very big guy, you know, and I'm a small girl. And I was like, oh my gosh, this big boss, what if I don't do a good job? And I went home one day and I said, you know what? The biggest risk I'm going to have here is he finds me lousy and is going to tell me, sorry, you need to go. You're not doing a good job. Am I okay with that? You know, am I okay with being told that I need you to leave? And I said to myself, you know what? This is once in a lifetime opportunity. When next am I going to get the opportunity to work for somebody who worked at NASA, you know, like an engineer from NASA? It was really cool to me. And I said, I have still, you know, good experience. I have my MBA. I'm sure I can find another job. Worst case scenario, if I get let go. So I took it on, and it's really, I think, changed my career path in terms of coming into the data world as a woman at that young age in this very senior role. And really starting that sort of philosophy transformation of how customer experience and product need to marry data and analytics to actually change the game for front-end customers. Because in those days, there was a lot of analytics and statistics that happened. I always refer to it as a lab environment, where it was more kind of experimentation, but nothing would go into the front office and touch the customer at the end of the day. And I was like, this needs to change, because what's the value of all the work we're doing? We need to work closely with the digital product teams. We need to embed ourselves into, you know, the digital experiences, make them a lot more predictive so that customers maybe, you know, prevent taking like overdraft charges, which is one of the number one reasons of attrition in banking. And that really, you know, thrived my career for the next 4 years, 5 years after that, into becoming a data leader that is really bringing sort of the focus on digital customer experiences into the analytics space.
You know what I think is the most powerful line in that really interesting story is when you said, you know, I looked at it and I thought, well, if I have to, I can always find another job doing something else. And that comes from a core confidence that some people don't have. And I remember years ago, there was a woman who talked about a disastrous thing. And she just said, and she was older, she goes, I can always make more money. And it was that knowledge that she could take the risk because everything would be okay. And you taking that risk, that is wisdom that you're sharing with others that say, you know, what are the odds if you do something and it's not the right thing, that you're going to be eating out of a garbage pail because you did it? They're
slim to none.
Right. It's zero. It's zero. And it's, you've got to find your path. You don't ever know how far you can go until you get uncomfortable. Mm-hmm. And so, you know, good for you doing that. But speaking of uncomfortable, so you did leave a very big job and are doing something very uncomfortable, which is a startup that is really interesting. And I want you to tell about that process and what it is, because I find it fascinating.
But one thing I will say, go for the risk and take the risk, but it's important for each one of us individually to know what we're comfortable losing, specifically at that time, I was a single woman living in London. I had built myself some nice financial cushion. I have always been a saver in life since I went to high school. I always have been saving. So I knew, worst case scenario, if I get fired, I can, support myself for at least, 6 to 9 months. I can pay my bills. I'm not going to be evicted. So I think very different story for someone who may be a single mother with a child,
Right.
doesn't have a supporting husband, and who's going to pay the bills next month if I get fired, So to your point, I think risk taking any day, because you don't know how far you can go in life and what you're going to learn that may actually excite you even more than what you were doing. But do it knowing exactly what you're willing to lose and not lose, And but yeah, I left the corporate world last year around springtime, late spring, and joined forces with my husband. He's a fintech entrepreneur. And he's sort of, I would say, the experienced, startup guru, versus I have always been an entrepreneur trying to operate like a startup inside big corporations, but never took the leap to actually go out there and raise money and do my own thing. But we, together, when we met, when I was at Barclays, we always bonded over this sort of common passion of we wanted to build a financial services organization one day that for once focus on helping people make money who are not making enough money. So not just, hey, bring that paycheck, and once that paycheck is in, then we help you to save more, to invest, to borrow, all these great things, which are very, very important for our lives too. But if someone is not making enough money, then where is the opportunity there? It's helping them make more money, and banks are not playing a role there. And that's where we always saw that gap. But a bit of a personal story since the pandemic. I have a very close family member who's been, dealing with addiction for many, many years, was unemployed, was arrested a few times, with a criminal record. And this individual had a phenomenal comeback story. We finally managed, to, as a bigger family ecosystem, help the individual get into recovery. This person started, saving for his life again, has a job full time, supports everything, in his needs, and life, started traveling again. It really inspired me that, wow, this is not the story of just this family member. I'm sure there's millions of my family member out there. And we also at the same time ran into this Wall Street Journal article that talked about the challenges of formerly incarcerated people. So literally when you come home from prison, and that's 600,000 people and plus every single year in the United States, you face a series of challenges of getting employment, getting housing, getting access to financial products, just rebuilding your life, your emotional relationships, you name it. And it kind of just like we connect the dots. We're like, you always wanted to do something where we help people make money. And look at this, as a huge community in America today that has way more disadvantages than even when I arrived there as an immigrant. I was way, welcomed with wider arms than somebody who's already an American is just trying to come home and have a better life again and, rebuild their life. So we got to do something. And my husband and I started looking into the problem and really realized, yeah, there is a lot we can do by coming up with a solution, by helping these individuals, get easy access into the banking system, but more importantly, helping them start, making money and eventually become business owners. We know, all of us, the biggest wealth in America is built through entrepreneurs. When you own your own business and become moving yourself from out of the debt side of the equation into the ownership side and having equity. We're like, how can we make that more of a safe path for more Americans? Since the pandemic, almost, I think 1.5 to 2 million businesses have erupted just in these past 2 years. But more than half have also failed. And that's for many different reasons. Could be lack of access to tools, to finances, to capital. And that's what we want to change, sort of these two trends, helping people make more money, become business owners. There's more and more the need and the trend of people wanting to become their own boss and not work for somebody else. And the way we're doing it, we're marrying digital banking and masterclass together and saying we want to have this catalog of small businesses that you can pick from. We started with box trucking, home inspections is the next, but imagine one day commercial cleaning, starting a painting company, a drywall installation company, and you get the playbook of how to start this business and run it successfully so you can take home at least $100,000, for your family every year. So which is a game changer for those people who are just living off of $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 a year to put themselves in the next bracket. And this, we notice, applies to many more Americans than just formerly incarcerated. They just happen to be very, very entrepreneurial and an amazing community to help right away because they're desperately in need.
I just think that is brilliant. And it's so interesting how that, that idea came. And I think a lot of people are so close to a real idea and they don't even know it. But what made you have the courage to say, let's do this? And then here's how. How did that all come to be?
I think knowing that I had an amazing partner in crime that I trusted so much, my husband, I think that's what I needed. I have had that entrepreneurial itch for a while. And when I was at Barclays back in 2012, I wanted to do a fitness company then. So actually I had an HBS classmate and she's one of my best friends here in Dallas. She has 3 fitness studios, but we wanted to start something that actually at the same time was started by a different company called ClassPass. And we wanted to create this digital wallet called Well Wallet, where you could come in and just try out different classes from different gyms, collect points, and also get expanded into other wellness experiences such as massages, manicure, pedicure, etc. And she decided she didn't want to, at that time, focus on building a business on the computer. She actually wanted to have the physical interaction with people and teach classes. So it didn't go through after working on it for 8 months. But I would say that spirit resonated with me. And when my husband and I, met, I always admired him, adored him so much for being an entrepreneur. He exited his last company successfully. And I think when we spoke about this, we are like, look, we don't have children. I was 39 last year, I just, recently turned to 40. I'm like, if not now, then when?
Right.
Like time is running and there will be only more and more reason of why not.
Right.
So time to do it. And now we also have a third co-founder, an amazing individual who's based in Seattle. He's our founding chief technology officer. So it's the 3 of us and the husband and wife and the CTO. But we're like, we kind of model ourselves against companies such as Canva or Eventbrite, which are also husband and wife and the sort of co-founder CTO who joined the ship, and they made it into a big success. So we're rolling and let's see where we will be in 2 years from now.
Was it scary?
It's very scary. I thought the corporate life at times was scary because, they're restructuring, they're changing, budgets are being cut, or, now we have these aggressive goals, the regulators are coming. But I think with startups, time feels a lot longer than it actually is. So when you go through a week, it seems like you lived a whole month because of these constant ups and downs, the uncertainty every single day. You get a piece of good news, but then you get 10 pieces of bad news and you have to keep going, and not give up. I think this emotional roller coaster ride is way more intense than any type of corporate job. And the limited resources, and we always, complain about, oh my gosh, budgets are cuts in corporate world. Here, every dollar counts. And you just learn at some point to really work on your emotional sort of experience doing this. I meditate a lot, I go for walks so that you don't go high with the highs and you don't go low with the lows. You kind of just go static, because for every high, there is an even lower low. And if you just go up and down emotionally, it's just unbearable. So you just have to find a way.
I hear you. I've been an entrepreneur and self-employed for 23 years, and you have good years, you have bad years. There's one thing when it's all on you to pay your bills and everything else, you have to make it succeed. And so it was just me, and I was doing it. And what I always think is easier is when somebody has a great idea and then they have a partner or a spouse who has a quote unquote real job, so that then, they've got an income coming in and then you can do your thing and make it go. But, you both are all in. You're all in. You have to make it work. And I think when it has to work, it works. Maybe it's not the thing you're devising right now, but there's going to be something where there's a turn to something that's going to work. Mm-hmm. And what happens is that when businesses go under, and I understand there are so many explanations and everything, but a lot of them go under because it's hard. It never goes according to plan. it's always a twist and pivot and a test to see how bad you really want it. And I think sometimes people just quit a week too soon. They don't know how close they are to getting around the corner, and they're unwilling to take one more tough step. So I give you props because both of you are all in on that.
See, my biggest fear was you're too old. I'm too old, because with all these stories you hear on TechCrunch and, Fast Company, these young entrepreneurs were like fresh out of college and raising so much money. Like, maybe I'm just too old,
You need to stop that. You're I'm not even going to say how much younger you are than I am.
VCs backing so many young companies, but those are the headlines, and there is also a lot of research you read that actually once you hit 40, that's actually the blooming years of being a wonderful entrepreneur because of much more experiences you have in your people management, etc. So I have to get over that I can still do it, even though I'm not in my 20s or early 30s. Maybe I bring something else to the table. So.
Listen, I bring a lot to the table. I'm 20 years older than you, and you know what? I'll hold my own any day. And I remember being 28 years old and saying to a therapist, "I feel so old," and her laughing in my face. And I have never felt younger, and we've got a lot in us. 40 years old. Your 40s last about a month. And then you're in your 50s, and those last about 3 weeks. It goes quick. So you just keep moving, knowing you've got something to offer. And I tell people, don't ever let age talk you out of something.
No.
But it's about the physical capacity. Like I used to pull all-nighters in my early 30s. And now one night I sleep 3 hours and I feel like a dead person the next day. So that's the part where I'm like, I can't compete with the younger entrepreneurs.
Yes, you can.
You're not competing with them, right?
You got more brain power.
It's not about them. Yeah.
I think of every stupid waste of time thing I did in my 20s and 30s. Look, you got a lot of advantage.
But what I will say is working with my husband has been the most enjoyable. Like now I really feel like this is the most amazing working relationship. And I've had a bunch of really amazing working relationships. Some of my best friends, I met through work. But this one, like, I think when you're married, and we always joke around that because you sometimes get these comments, oh, how can you work with your wife? Or how can you work with your husband? I'm like, people decide to have children together. Don't you think that's an even bigger commitment than just, doing a company together, like actually raising a human being together, depending how involved each party is, I guess. But in this one, like it's just has created so much more, I think, mental bonding. And you're very different. He's very detailed, meticulous. I'm very sort of broad and strategic. I'm an open book. I'm an extrovert. He's an introvert. So we're the exact opposite. When I'm like pissed off about something, I just say it right away. Versus with him, you have to have high intelligence to read his body language to know that you seem frustrated. Tell me what's going on. And you have to kind of squeeze it out of him. And it really, I think, took our communication styles to the next level. It's been really, really amazing, irrespective of what happens with Stretch, getting or being in this privileged position to do this together.
I'll tell you what, this has been awesome. And, I've had the privilege of being able to work with you and know you outside of this podcast. And before I kind of go through the wrap, I would say this, what always struck me with you, Yassi, is you're an incredible trailblazer and you are warm and people gravitate toward you because it's real and it's genuine. That servant leader, that the fact that I feel like you're very in touch with who you are and you're confident enough to stand up for your values and you're smart enough to know to surround yourself with really amazing people. And those things just kept coming through in the stories you were telling. A few of the kind of just nuggets that I wrote down as well was on that line, right? Just when taking risks, know what you're comfortable losing, but you got to get out there and try. Following your ethical compass is going to pay off in the long run. So again, staying true to who you are. And then, as I said earlier, just a smile is a great conversation starter. You're just doing amazing things in the world and you're changing people's lives with the work you're doing now. And I think it's fabulous. And we all hope to be able to make that kind of mark and impact. So we're cheering for you. We're rooting for you. We just really thank you for being here.
Yeah.
Thanks for coming.
We're working hard, and a bit of luck, we'll take it too.
Yeah, you're going to do it. You're going to do it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for joining the Hard-Won Wisdom podcast with best-selling author Fawn Germer and corporate innovator Michelle Brigman. Join us weekly for career and life-changing conversations with some of today's most influential thought leaders, senior executives, and trailblazers who will share their mentoring wisdom. This podcast is brought to you by the Women's Leadership Network. Visit hardwonwisdom.com for more on this podcast and for links to Fawn and Michelle's web pages and social media. Also, be sure to rate, subscribe, and review wherever you listen to your podcasts. We really appreciate that effort, and we'll see you next week.